No, there is no clean, neat narrative, although if we're going to give it one, Bill Lee has a bird's eye view not only on the United States and Europe, but also on China. And I do want to get to China. Bill Lee, chief economist at the Milken Institute. But before we get there, I want your sense of some of the moves that we saw in the bond market, the whipsawing action that we saw, people pricing in rate hikes, and then, frankly, going absolutely in the other way. In some places it made sense, in others not so much. Does this mean to you that we are going to see slower growth? Is there any fundamental narrative that we can pin to this?
The one thing that came out of the Milken Global Conference is that economists and market practitioners and portfolio managers really have a very different view of inflation. The portfolio managers and bond managers were all obsessed with the fact that prices are high and going to go higher. And this notion of transitory is just completely verboten. Economists are still towing the Fed line, which says that we have some transitory but persistent influences keeping prices high. And one of those influences is the fact that we have these bottlenecks slowing down growth. That's really the key. How much is growth going to be slowing down, and how much of the future is being priced in on the slowdown side, and how much of it is the persistent high price? And that's where you see the tension.
And Bill, a lot of this is actually stemming from what's happening in China as the Communist Party meets for its annual plenum. I am wondering, the price increases that we're seeing there, how much does this indicate, frankly, a protracted increase in prices around the world that people perhaps are not accounting for, this sort of deglobalization and, frankly, changed regime in China filtering into prices and slower growth globally?
China is really being hit by a confluence of domestic and global factors. The one thing that we see in China, which is almost a microcosm of what we're seeing globally, is the sense that producer prices are double digits. They're rising by 10%. And yet consumer prices are maybe 0.7% and project to go up to 1.4% with the new release. And that's where you see the authoritarian control of being able to manage retail prices, and, of course, at the expense of profit compression. One of the things that they're banking on is that Xi Jinping's leadership, and that's what they're trying to have a historical review to justify, is that Xi Jinping's leadership will produce enough productivity gains to be able to keep margins up and to keep Chinese companies profitable.
Is that lifelong leadership, Bill, a growing risk for this economy?
Boy, you know, John, that everyone is really looking toward the sense of how is it that Xi Jinping is going to be able to pull off the return to Mao's doctrines of common prosperity, creating a moderately prosperous economy for everyone, and at the same time focus innovation on domestic sources and domestic sources of growth and domestic sources for export, and at the same and keep it done in a way that allows the rest of the world to be part of China's growth. The Xi Jinping leadership is something that they're going to come out with and say, the one thought we have to keep in mind is that Mao Zedong allowed China to stand up and unify China. Deng Xiaoping made China rich, but Xi Jinping, is the one who has made China strong and allows China to stand up among the League of Nations as the first among equals. That's the historical review that will come out in this meeting to justify we need Xi Jinping's leadership. That's the rhetoric, and I think the sacrifice is going to be toward focusing on domestic growth, sacrificing innovation, and doing it in a way that preserves this Communist Party's power as opposed to productivity and growth.
Bill, you mentioned the power on the international stage. What about domestically? How strong is that power right now?
You know, there are mixed reports. From the outside, it looks like there's a unified front. Xi Jinping has, abolished term limits, and now he's in for life. But he's worried that he's not going to get enough support to be able to carry out these policies. It's not so much at the top levels that he's afraid of, but the municipal governments and state and local governments that have to implement these policies. There's a huge tension right now, let's say caused by, say, the energy crisis. The federal government sucks in all the taxes, but the local, state, and local governments have to manage their expenditures and manage their budgets. That tension between state and local governments and the federal government is something that Xi Jinping has to manage. And between now and the time of the next National Party's Congress, National People's Congress in next year, that has to be solidified because he has to have a unanimous call for him to stay in power.
Do we see a slowdown in growth that becomes a problem for the global economy, Bill, in China?
Oh, yeah, because right now China is suffering from an energy crisis, which is stalled production and transshipments. The notion of having a common prosperity has really focused Chinese policy on hitting the most productive companies in all of China. The internet companies, they're also hitting on education, which is something that they've been trying to use to try to bootstrap themselves to increase human capital. So managing these policies is something that we in the West would have to worry about as investors, because the role for investment is going to be clearly not a primary role, but only insofar as Western investment will help China become as manufacturing conduits to the rest of the world. If you can help China take its innovations out to the rest of the world, you've got a successful business. If you're in a competing business with Chinese innovation, you're in trouble.
But longer term, I mean, does this have the potential to cement Xi's legacy as one of the most successful leaders? Can he really achieve common prosperity? That's
the big bet. We know that Shenzhen, for example, is a model city in China's Silicon Valley. It's become successful because it was copying China's model, Hong Kong's model of innovation, which is to experiment. Xi Jinping's latest speech on Shenzhen says you should innovate with this eye toward the needs of the center. In other words, they're managing the direction of innovation. They're managing the direction in which these companies have to focus their growth. That's a dangerous game, because that may or may not work. And most of the experience we've had with managed growth and industrial policy is that most industrial policies fail.
Hey, Bill, thank you, sir. As always, it's good to catch up. Bill Lee there of the Milken Institute. Lisa, another thing that you're interested in, very few countries left pursuing zero COVID. China's one of them. Yeah, and it's actually creating a lot of internecine debate, especially with Hong Kong saying, come on, guys, please let us lighten up. We're doing the best that we can, but we're actually getting businesses pushing back and not wanting to have their headquarters here. How much can they pursue zero COVID for something that isn't going away? They are never going to achieve zero COVID if they want to open their borders. This has huge consequences for the supply chain. And looking at